I don't really like shonen anime anymore. In a way, I feel kinda bad for saying that. Like most people, one of my first big true anime experiences was with the absolute behemoth of the 90s that was Dragon Ball Z. For most kids during the 90s in America, shonen was probably the big gateway into anime for them, and it's not hard to see why. Shonen is characterized by the fact that it has a lot of action and fighting in it, which fits in perfectly with our American sensibilities. It's a genre that's easy to sell to a foreign market, much easier than something like this. Or this. Or especially this. But because of the ease of insertion, shonen shows ran rampant on the airwaves for years, and they just never seemed to end. Dragon Ball Z, 291 episodes. Bleach, 366 episodes. Naruto, close to 700 episodes if you combine the original series and Shippuden. Who has time for that kind of commitment anymore? I know I certainly don't. At least with a long-running sitcom or straight-up comedy show, I don't have to worry about, getting bogged down with tons of continuity or waiting 10 episodes for a single fight to finish, which is the main problem that a lot of these shonen shows have. The only ones I can think of off the top of my head that don't really have this same sort of problem are ones like Busorenken or Soul Eater. They have enough sense to just do what they need to do, not overstay their welcome, and then end gracefully. But there was at least one action show that I watched growing up that managed to avoid the typical shonen trope of overstaying its welcome. It was a little supernatural action show known as Yu Yu Hakusho. Well, I call it long-running, but compared to most of its ilk, it's actually much more manageable at only 112 episodes, and while I do still think it sort of overstays its welcome, there's no doubt that it's definitely a fun time. Yu Yu Hakusho is the story of Yusuke Urameshi, a 14-year-old delinquent with a penchant for street fighting and a distaste for authority. And he's got a slight problem. He's dead.
Could it mean I've turned into a ghost?
Bingo! Bingo! You win the prize!
However, due to the nature of his death, he sacrificed himself to save a child from being hit by a reckless driver, the powers that be decide that he should have another shot at life. Assisted by the perky and very faux British farrier of souls, Botan, he sets off to complete a quest to return to life. And that lasts about 7 episodes before we completely forget about it and he's returned to life. Yeah, the premise of the show that we're initially given doesn't really last that long, and after that, the real plot of the show begins. After his return to life, Yusuke is made into the Spirit Detective of Earth, basically a guy who has to take down spiritual, demonic, and supernatural problems that pervade the earthly realm. Don't let the whole detective moniker fool you, though. This is a shonen show. Pretty much every single case that Yusuke takes on is solved in ways like this.
Monster meets paradise!
Or this.
This is for my friends, you jerk!
Or especially this. The show becomes very recognizably shonen at this point, if you couldn't tell. Every arc begins with the threat being identified, the stakes being laid out, and Yusuke and friends going off to confront the big bad and beat down whatever the hell gets in their way, whether it be the minions, the architecture, or some very poorly timed personal spats. There's a couple of tournament arcs thrown in as well, because of course there is, this is a shonen show after all. While the stories of these arcs do have some interesting ideas, and, well, they're probably the low points of the show, most of the time. So if it's so recognizably shonen, what makes it so good? Well, it's probably the characters. Most shonen shows are characterized by having at least one main character who is undoubtedly a good guy in actions, words, and deeds. They're also not the sharpest tools in the box more often than not. While Yusuke definitely won't win any awards for intelligence, he's definitely not stupid and actually presents himself as more intelligent than some of the other shonen heroes. But the reason why he's so good as a character is because, well, he's an asshole.
It's just my pure energy, and I bet it can kick the crap out of your spirit gun.
That depends on what finger I use.
Well, as it turns out...
This is our hero, folks. He's crude, he's crass, he's quick to raise his fists. While it is shown that he has a good heart, and while he'd rather be doing anything other than actual work, in the end, he's willing to lay down his life for his friends and the world at large. Usually not because of some deep sense of honor or responsibility or any of that hooey. He just thinks the guys he's fighting are jerks and can't say no to a good brawl. Saving the world is basically a bonus for him. His friends aren't much better, to be honest. Kurama, while he appears to be the most altruistic and calm of the recurring characters, is shown to be very cutthroat and conniving, and is willing to compromise his own moral compass if it means securing victory for him and his friends.
A man like Sensui has no other loyalty except to himself and his cause. And he cares nothing for how much blood is shed to reach that goal. Not even the blood of an ignorant young boy who foolishly chose wrong over right.
It's only exacerbated when he gains access to his literal inner demon later on in the series.
Creating a bomb from nothing takes talent. That caliber of power is a sign you belong to a superior class of demons, a class I consider to be fairly worthy. Worthy to fight, and worthy to die.
Oh, shut up, fangirls. Hiei is definitely the most anti-hero out of all of them. He's cold, callous, and is more driven by an ultimate thirst for vengeance than anything else. His character arc is one of the most traditional out of the cast, and while I don't find him to be terribly interesting as the cold, badass archetype, he is one of the most popular characters in the show's fandom. In fact, the only character in our main cast that would fit the typical shonen hero archetype is Kuwabara. He's a big-mouth street punk who starts as Yusuke's fighting rival, and is pretty much confirmed to be a stone-cold idiot. He has moments of brilliance here and there, but it's generally accepted that he is the dumbest of the four main fighters. He's also consistently the weakest of the four as well. While it is shown that he's more powerful than pretty much any other human could be, compared to his companions, he is almost no match for any of them. These are the four main fighters, but of course there is a wealth of minor characters, many of whom are pretty entertaining as well. I've already mentioned Botan and her boss Koenma, who acts as Yusuke's employers, informants, and supporters during his missions. They're both pretty damn entertaining. And then there's Genkai, probably one of the best mentor figures I've seen in anime. She's just as much of an asshole as Yusuke is, but the difference is she at least has a lot of life experience behind her to back up her cynical, abrasive attitude. And while she does recognize the threat that the demons pose to the world, her primary concern is just to help Yusuke realize his potential as a fighter and a spirit warrior so that she can officially pass on her techniques and abilities and retire to live out the rest of her golden years in relative peace and solitude. Also, she plays video games, and old people who play video games are okay in my book. The villains are fairly typical shonen. Almost all of them are power-obsessed demons who either want to rule over or completely destroy the human world. While they all have their own Freudian excuses for why they do what they do, they're all pretty single-minded in their approach, and I can't think of many villains that stick out in the series save for Toguro. And Toguro only sticks out because he was there for so long, lasting 2 really long arcs, one of them being the Dark Tournament, probably the longest arc in the entire series. Yes, he definitely was one of the most dangerous villains that Yusuke fought, and left more of an impression than Sakyo or the 4 Saint Beasts, or I'm sorry, I can't remember the names of the villains in the Demon Tournament arc at all, ever did. In terms of animation quality, it's actually quite nice, especially considering that it was made in 1992. Yeah, the series really is that old, believe it or not. Everything looks nice and consistent, and I'm particularly fond of the different demon designs seen throughout the series, even if a few of them stretch the bounds of believability. A giant rock monster that can split itself up, a ninja that uses bloody makeup to cast spells, and a demon who kills and steals the power of psychics, I can buy that. But a pretty boy thunder demon who needs antennae to aim his shots, can split himself into 7, and revive himself with the power of his fallen copies? Yeah, that's about all I can take, and that guy was definitely god-modding his character sheet. The animation can seem slightly off at times, but that's mostly a consequence of the time it was made. It is pretty high quality cell animation, that's for sure, and the fight scenes in particular are fast and brutal, possessing an impact that more modern shonen shows just don't have. You could make the argument that early DBZ did have the definable crunch and slam impact, but that felt lessened as the series continued and the animation got cleaner. Here, you feel the impacts, and some of these hits, even from energy blasts, feel real, and look just so damn uncomfortable. Its choice in color palette is also appreciated, as it uses some great bright colors for a lot of the characters, and even those who use darker colors like Hiei tend to pop really well against most of the backgrounds, or other characters. Yusuke's signature green outfit, for example, stands out amazingly well in most of the environments he's seen wearing it in, and of course the bright fiery red of Kuwabara and Kurama's hair can't be understated. Another big plus of the series is that it's actually really funny, a trait that I don't find a lot of shonen shows pull off very well. Shows like DBZ, Naruto, and Bleach do actually try to have humorous moments and interludes, but in my opinion, they never really hit that sweet spot for humor. Or in the worst case scenario, the humorous stylings clash so hard with the seriousness that they're often presented with that it feels like two different anime being smashed together. Don't get me wrong, Yu Yu Hakusho does have plenty of serious moments that are treated with the severity it deserves, but when the series shifts from ultra serious to ultra silly, it doesn't feel out of place, mostly because there's usually some breathing room in between, a transitional calm between the humor and the drama. It also helps that the original manga that the anime was based off of was much more humor-focused. The only other shonen anime I can think of that manages to use humor as effectively is probably Soul Eater, which, by comparison, doesn't even enter into serious territory nearly as often as Hakusho did. The music is actually pretty interesting in the series as well. Not the background music though, that stuff is just there, and more often than not, it's totally forgettable. Heck, I remember several times not even really being able to tell whether music was playing or not, as there are several fight scenes that just don't use music at all in the background, which, again, only enhances the impact of the fighting moves. But it's the opening and ending themes that really stick out in terms of music. It's a long-held consensus that English dub themes for anime are usually inferior to the original Japanese, mostly due to English sensibilities not fitting Japanese songwriting, lazy-sounding lyrics, bored singers, and so on and so forth. However, I would argue that Yu Yu Hakusho's themes actually sound better in English. It's not because they're well written, a lot of them still have that weird English bent that rewritten anime themes often suffer from, but to my ear, it just sounds a whole lot better. It is pretty subjective, of course, but let's try an experiment, shall we? Better A...
With my back pressed against the weight of the world and the speed of the night.
Or better B. And then of course there's the infinitely catchy opening theme to the series, Smile Bomb, which I think actually works as a song in its own right. The singer puts some energy into it, it's catchy, it's upbeat. It might not get you pumped up for a show about demons getting punched in the face, but it still makes you feel real good.
Walking in a crowd, in a faceless town, I need to feel the touch of a friend. In the countryside, I wander far and wide, the isolation gets me again.
Speaking of English dubbing, this was one of the first dubs done by the budding at the time Funimation studio. And man did they hit it out of the park. I mean, there are a few shaky performances near the start of the series, but as it goes on, you can really tell that they felt more and more comfortable in their roles, and by the end, I can't really pick a bad performance out of the bunch for recurring characters. Justin Cooke plays Yusuke in the English dub, and it's rather impressive just how loud that guy manages to get. He plays the character with just the right amount of gruffness while still bringing out the fact that Yusuke is still a kid. And he screams a lot. Like, a lot.
This is for my friends, you jerk!
In fact, I'm willing to bet Yusuke screams more in this series than Goku did in DBZ. The series also has Chris Sabat, probably most known for his role as Piccolo, playing Kuwabara, and he brings his usual deep, gruff, growly voice to the mix, adding in just enough stupid to make Kuwabara the lovable street punk that we know. The only performance that stands out as being immediately recognizable as a little shaky, and again, only at the start of the series, is probably Cynthia Kraz's Botan. I like Botan as a character, but during the early part of the series, her peppy and bubbly personality did seem to be just a bit too peppy, not helped by the strange faux British accent she had that seemed to strain the delivery a little bit. The accent did disappear later on, and her personality evened out quick enough, and from there it was smooth sailing for the character. All this comes together to form a shonen show that I can easily marathon and still enjoy, as it doesn't get so up its own ass with its continuity and its lore that it feels far, far more easy to digest compared to what would come after. It sits in a very small group of other shows of the same genre, along with Buso Rankin and Soul Eater, of shonen shows that don't really overstay their welcome. Well, okay, maybe it does overstay its welcome a little bit. I don't meet a lot of people who are very big fans of its final arc, for example, but compared to the other shows I've been mentioning throughout this review that really overstay their welcome, ones like One Piece, which by the way is over 700 episodes long and only about halfway done according to its creator, Yu Yu Hakusho is a much more modest example of the genre. If you're interested in seeing the series for yourself, it's certainly not hard to find. While the series isn't playing on television anymore, the complete series can still be watched on Funimation's streaming site, and the DVD and Blu-ray collections are reasonably priced and very, very plentiful. The series is spread out over 4 different box sets ranging from $15 to $20 depending on what format you want. So go and watch it. There really is no reason to not give this series a try. It's considered a pretty classic staple of action anime at this point, and is a very good example of what you can do when you mix comedy and action together, especially with the way the characters play off of one another. It also does say something for the fact that it is this popular nearly 2 decades after its premiere in Japan, so there is that too. And I'd like to think that shows like this will eventually overtake Naruto in terms of how long people actually remember them. I'll see you next time, everybody.